Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. So yes, I do have the provocative title, AEW versus WWE. But before you get too excited, we're going to stay away from the companies themselves because I'm not interested in getting into that holy war. The other thing is I also have my personal preference. I've made it pretty clear on the channel. But at the same time, I don't think it's really a fair comparison. They're really two very different companies at this point in two different stages of development. Now, I do want to focus on the cards, though, for this conversation, and unfortunately, you can kind of sense a little bit of a difference because they're still at two different phases of their development in the same way, and that's reflected a lot in the difference between the two. So I'll make this simple. So while whether you can argue whether you prefer the WWE product or an AEW product and your reasons why, when it comes to the actual card products themselves, it's pretty much a one-sided thing. So here's the spoiler. WWE right now is further along in their development, but at the same time, I can blame the manufacturers to that to a certain degree, and circumstances as well, so I want to kind of cover a little bit of those different aspects of it when I'm doing this comparison. So to be absolutely fair, I have to understand that there is going to be a difference between the two, but I also want to talk about a couple of the reasons why there's a gap between the two. So WWE right now is much further ahead, but the gap for me should be narrower than it is. And the reason it isn't is part of what I want to talk about in this video. So this is the first of these kind of wrestling-oriented subject matter videos. I'll have more talking about different topics and stuff, and we'll mix up the different formats as we go along. But for this one, I'm going to do a comparison between AEW and between WWE, but I'm also going to give you part of the reason why. So let's get straight into it. First one that I want to talk about here is the release consistency. So for this one, I think the best thing for me to do is to give a little bit of a visual aid. So while I'm talking through it, I'm going to show you. I'm going to put it on the screen. Now, what you're seeing right now, just to make life easy, is I decided to take the releases for 2022 for both AEW and WWE. And what you're going to notice when you're looking at the screen is you're going to see that I kept it really simple. I kept all the AEW stuff on the left and all the WWE stuff on the right. Now, you're going to notice right away a discrepancy between the two, right? It's actually worse than it looks. I'll be completely honest with you. And I'll explain why here in a second. But the reason to tell you first why I picked 2022 is because in 2021, Upper Deck was literally just getting started with the AEW license. So they had just released their first products. But the second part reason that I wanted to focus on it is because in 2022, we know what the full release schedule is. 2023 is still being developed. We're still learning more releases as we're going along. But 2022, we know what all the WWE releases were through Panini, and we know what the AEW releases were. There's an important factor that I'm going to add into this here in a second. But already, if you look at the two, left and right, you're going to notice a discrepancy. You're going to see there's more releases for Panini. You're going to see there's different price points. You know, Revolution was not a very expensive product, but there were some nice cards in it. Chronicles is a little bit of a straightforward product, but it's an interesting product. It's got retail and it's got hobby as well. And then you've got some higher end products like Impeccable and Immaculate. And then you've got Prism, which is kind of in between. It's your Chromium product. And then you've got Select, which is another Chromium product. And NXT tends to be more of a value brand as well, but it's one where you can get autographs and stuff. So there's a pretty good lineup of different stuff from the Panini offerings. Now, what we can do is we can say, if we're being completely fair, is that WWE obviously has a lot of marketing power behind it. And then Panini is pretty well developed in terms of being able to put out a lot of different products. And a lot of these are very similar in design and setup to a lot of the sports card products that are coming out. However, it's not like Upper Deck is new to this, so let's be fair. So when we look over to the left side, what we see is we see Upper Deck Flagship, as we see Metal Universe, and we see AEW Allure. Now, Allure is going to supposedly take up the spot of the Chromium products. Now, I'm talking about it in this way because now I'm going to kind of explain why I say it's actually worse than it looks. So let me kind of switch over to the second image. And if you notice, the only difference between the first and the second image is that I grayed out a couple of the images on the left. And the reason for that is that even though we know what the 2022 releases are, we're in 2023 and Metal Universe and Allure have both not come out yet. But if you notice, all the ones on the right, they're all still in color. And the reason they're all in color and the reason I was able to show you the hobby boxes for all these different ones is because they're all out. You can go onto eBay right now, you can go buy yourself cards from Revolution or Chronicles or Immaculate or Impeccable, Prism, Select, or NXT. They're all available for you. I can show you different cards. I have a handful of cards from some of them now. But the point is, I go look over the left, I can show you some 2022 Flagship, but I can't show you anything from Metal Universe or Allure because the products haven't come out yet. And we don't know specifically when. But those delays have caused certain issues. Now, if we really get down to it, here's what it comes down to. Unfortunately, that image that I was able to show you really illustrates one of the major problems that I think separates the two. Like I said, WWE has a lot of marketing power. And when I get to speaking about the checklist, which I'll talk about as my second main point, you're going to see that also there's a little bit of a difference there. So there's certain inherent advantages that WWE was always going to have, regardless. And there's nothing AEW can do about those. And there's nothing Upper Deck can do about those, because they're just inherent advantages that WWE / Panini / Topps or whoever with WWE is working with. Those are advantages they are automatically going to have, no matter what. But the gap should be narrower than it is because Upper Deck has enough experience to be able to develop products that could at least make it interesting, make it a little bit more competitive between the two. Because in 2022, you had Flagship, and then you had Allure representing a Chromium product, which is great. But then you've also got Metal Universe, which represents, kind of PMGs and that kind of thing, a bit of a chase. But at the same time, we don't really have that high-end product. Now, in 2021, Spectrum was the high-end product, and I'm going to talk about that in my third point about consistency. But the point is that we do see a big gap. And right now, the fact that 2 of the 3 products haven't been released yet and we're in 2023, that's part of the problem. So that consistency, these delays, and we can talk about the various reasons for them, and I think we can talk about them at some more length in some future videos. But the point is, these delays cause certain specific issues. One of them is that the checklists are out of date. So even as you go and you're releasing these products, some of the characters may not be around. So, they might have changed companies. Or it might be a situation where maybe they're no longer prominently featured on television. Or you're showing tag teams that are no longer tag teams. Factions that are no longer factions. And it doesn't reflect the current product. So even when somebody's opened this up, this doesn't make sense anymore. You got folks that maybe had a championship run and it was never reflected in the original product. And that's kind of the issue that you're running into with a lot of the stuff. It's just not showing. For example, currently, if you're watching the current AEW product, you're watching and you're seeing, Toni Storm and Saraya and Ruby Soho are doing a thing as part of this female faction that's going on. Right now, I don't expect with like a year lead time, that's the normal thing, to be able to reflect all that. But at the same time, we're far enough along that Toni Storm is not even reflected on a single regular card yet. She has cards that are developed through Upper Deck EPAC, and you can get those cards, the debut cards or the new arrivals cards, I think they're called, and you've got those options. And then for pay-per-views and all that, you can get Toni Storm cards through that. But as far as a pack pull product, it's not available yet. Well, Toni Storm was able to make her debut, win a championship, lose the championship, and now as part of a faction that part of the storyline is the aftermath of her winning the championship, and that entire title reign is not even reflected in any of the products yet because of the lead time and the delays. I expect that'll be corrected in the future, but the point is right now, if you want to get a Toni Storm card from a pack pull product, you actually have to go to WWE. And that's, like I said, that product delay creates part of that problem. Another thing that it also does, and I'm also checking my notes as I'm talking about it, you're missing opportunities when something's already happening. The lead time was always going to be the case for that because you have to develop a product well in advance. So both companies have that issue. The WWE product is also going to miss out on some stuff because of the time delay. But eventually they do catch up. But right now the delay is so long with a lot of the product releases from Upper Deck and AEW that it's way more pronounced, let's put it that way. And whereas right now Panini is able to, or was able to, release these products on a pretty regular schedule, these big time gap delays also created a loss of momentum. And that's one of the other pieces that I wanted to talk about from a release consistency standpoint, is that those big gaps created a loss of momentum because you don't have enough. At that point, you've got so much time between these different products that the hype is gone. When the first product came out, the very first one, it came out a little bit hot, maybe a little bit too hot, given the checklist and the relative odds of everything. Certain people had certain expectations because of the secondary market. Well, the delay for the second product kind of corrected that because it took so long that it didn't come out too hot, but then in the end, the secondary market kind of took over. And there's another element to it when it comes to the EPAC that I'll talk about in a little bit that also kind of changed the dynamics, and it's something that specifically is different with the way Upper Deck does their business versus the way Panini does their business. And neither is better or worse, but they do create two different dynamics, and I want to touch on that again in my third point for the consistency piece. Now let's talk about the checklist. The checklist is a big one because that's the part that AEW can't do anything about, and it's the part that Upper Deck can't do anything about, really. Now, there's something they can do to mitigate it, and I'll talk about that here in a second, but the truth is the gap between the two in terms of checklists is something they can't overcome. And that's because WWE is institutionalized. They've got way too much of a history, and they've got way too many different characters that fall under the WWE umbrella. So whereas AEW has a few legends, you can talk about Arn Anderson, you can talk about Sting, you can talk about even Billy Gunn if you want to go there, or Paul White, or Mark Henry. So you've got Jake the Snake Roberts. So you've got folks that are legends in wrestling that you can throw in sets, and they have. But where WWE can go to the other side of it, and they've got all those folks under Legends contracts, so they can grab different folks in there. And I'll just use the example here for Chronicles. So we got our here sells a Sid Vicious. There you go. So the point is that you can pull up, and as an example here, you can see that they've got that Legends logo, that WWE Legends logo. So they have a whole roster. So they have a whole roster of characters that would fall under this. And there's a variety of them. So that allows you in the checklist to be able to say, okay, so you can have base cards of these characters, you can have autographs of these characters, maybe memorabilia in some cases, mostly autographs and base cards. or inserts as well. But the point is, it's a lot easier. So if you're trying to sell a product, in your Panini in this case, and you can go to depth, even if you don't like Sid Vicious, you can have Stone Cold Steve Austin, you can have the $1 Million Man. The point is, you've got all these different characters you can draw from that you have access to and potentially be able to bring into these products. Well, that allows you to then capture maybe the group of people who don't really care about the current crop of people. So you're going to have folks maybe that want to prospect a little bit. They want to see some of the NXT talents. But then you've got some folks that want some of those legend cards or legend autographs or whatever the case may be. And then you've got folks that are interested in the current product. So that's a pool of 3 different groups of people to be able to draw from. So that automatically will make the checklist a little bit more comprehensive and at the same time give you different options than if, well, you pretty much got to go with the current product because that's it. You want some legends? Well, who's on staff? Who do we currently have hired? And that's part of the reason that you include the ring crew, and that's part of the reason you include the announcers and all that, which still adds variety. It's still good, but it's testament to you're trying to kind of fill out that checklist. Now, one thing you could do to mitigate this is a suggestion or thought, is that now that AEW has the Ring of Honor thing, I don't know if they would consider that a separate contract, but that might be a good excuse for them to include maybe a subset or something of Ring of Honor folks, or folks that are predominantly in Ring of Honor, as an addition to the regular checklist, and as a way of kind of expanding it without having to cheat a little bit, without having to use the same person multiple times. You could use certain talents that are going to be focused on Ring of Honor and include them as part of a checklist. That could be a way of expanding it without cheating too much. Another thing you could do as a way of around it, if you can kind of work the licensing issue, is if things like Forbidden Door and the New Japan, cross promotion that they have, if they can incorporate some of those talents in there, that might be a way to do it as part of an insert set or as part of a subset. That might be another way to flesh out a checklist a little bit more. But those are ways that you kind of get around the problem. WWE, like I said, can go to the well. They've got the current, they've got the NXT, and then you can go to the legends if you have to, in a pinch. And that means checklist-wise, WWE has a major advantage right off the top that AEW or Upper Deck can't compete with. And there's not too much they can do with it other than maybe the workaround that I suggest or something similar. Now let's talk about product consistency, because that's a little bit different than release consistency. Release consistency is the problem that if you don't have enough releases or that they're not spaced out in a logical way, it creates loss of momentum. It loses out on opportunities. The checklists are way out of date. All of a sudden the roster doesn't even match up. But you got that. But you also have product consistency. And this is something that I think that's something that can be improved. I don't know if it's been yet because, again, we're waiting on those new products. So maybe it's already starting to improve and we just haven't seen it yet. But I'm still going to call it out where I see it. Now, the example for this I want to give is something very similar to the critique I had with the release consistency. And it was about the things falling out of date or falling out of time. But one of the things that you do have control over, to a certain degree, is your relationship with the company. So Upper Deck and AEW kind of have to coordinate on this a little bit. And something I noticed in the early products, where again, maybe this has already been fixed with a newer product, so I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. The possibility is still there that it can be corrected. But one of the issues with the early products was that there was a lot of templates. And the templates were used over and over again. And you saw it in different ways. So I'll try to show you the best of my ability. The focusing on this isn't the greatest, but I'm going to try. So I'll use some of the Britt Baker cards that I have here as an example. So we'll talk about Spectrum here. I don't want to harp on Spectrum too much, but I want to use it as an example. Okay, so there you go. So that's the base card. And as far as that's concerned, that's fine. But when we're talking about these different cards, I've got the different parallels. Parallels are fine. Because if we're doing a comparison between the two, if I had an issue with parallels, or if anybody had an issue with parallels, then talking about, something like Prism or talking about something like Select, there's tons of parallels. So parallels themselves are not an issue. However, the template, so I'll use Spectrum here as an example, the template gets used over and over again. So you've got that, but you've also got the autograph. So that might be a little tough to see. But that autograph, if you notice, it's the same image. It's the same picture. So you're using the same picture for the parallels, and you're using the same picture for the base card, and you're using the same picture for the autograph. Okay, well, what about if you get past the autograph? Well, what about the memorabilia cards? Well, the memorabilia cards are the same, but with a window cut out. It's the same card. It's the same card. Over and over again, right? Well, what about when you get into the autograph memorabilia? Okay, well, it's the window cut out with an autograph. So it's the same thing again. This whole stack of cards that I've got here, and this whole stack of cards that I've been talking about here, this, are all the same image over and over and over again. Different versions, parallels, and the bunch. So that whole stack is just the same image over and over again. Okay, well, on some of the other inserts, you do modify the image. There is a change in it, but use the metal card. It's a little hard to see, but basically there's an image there that gets used a fair bit. But here's the thing. There's some similarities to it. It's not exactly the same, but if you take a look there, this is a pose with, basically this is with the jacket and this is without a jacket. It's a very similar pose, Well, that image also comes up here. So if you can see that. Well, here's the thing. That image gets used a couple of other times. It gets used here on this card. There it is on the back as well. And it gets used on this card. So there's a memorabilia card as well. So that same image got used. Now, that isn't to say they didn't have other images that they could use. They did. But the point is that out of the amount of cards that I'm talking about, from that one specific set, from that one specific series, this image got used a whole heck of a lot, or something very similar to it. I'm going to give you a contrast to that. Now, in contrast to that, again, this is just one example, but this happened for a couple of different characters. So we'll use the example here for by contrast for WWE. We'll use an example of two characters that have modified already what's happening on television, but right now that hasn't been reflected in the set, which again, we talk about the lead time, which is fine. That's okay. But we're going to see what the difference is. So again, this is a higher end product. So this is immaculate. I understand that. But Spectrum was supposed to be a higher end product than the flagship, which it is. But at the same time, look at the difference in the way we present this. So I'm going to give you an example. So let's use this triple autograph. So this card, if you look at it, is actually on-card autograph, which is another bit of a differentiator between the two. But again, there are some logistical considerations, which is fine. I'm not going to worry about that. But I want you to focus your attention on the actual pictures that are being used here. This is important because I'm going to compare it to this other card, and I want you to notice the difference. So that is a triple autograph card. It actually went for, I think, a little over $800, so that's what the selling price on eBay. Now, let's compare it to this dual autograph card. Now, if you're noticing, it's two of the three characters are the same, but if you're noticing they're using different images, well, that is a bit of a value add. The truth is, you could 100% use the same image if you really wanted to. Like, you have the opportunity, but one thing you'll notice when you look through Immaculate, if you look at either one of these characters, or any of the three of them really, even though things have changed for the characters themselves, the fact is they do use different poses. Predominantly probably from the same photo shoots, but the point is you're using these different poses, you're using different images. And it isn't just the example. There's examples I pulled up just grabbing it on off eBay, but you can go grab different characters and you're going to notice the same thing. And what you're going to see there is you're going to see different photo shoots, different images, different gear, and it's just to give a little bit of variety to it. The thing is that there is a money savings and there is a certain amount of ease with being able to use templates. And to a point, that isn't to say, by the way, that WWE and Panini don't reuse certain images. But the thing is, they use it, the duplication is a little bit more sparing. And I think that helps the product a little bit. And that's one of the big differentiators, that when you're going for a slightly higher end product or a much higher end product, because Immaculate is a higher end product, but Impeccable has the same thing as well. And the images between the Impeccable and the Immaculate aren't always identical either. There's differences in those as well. And the pictures that are being used are different than the ones being used in Select, and the ones that are different than being the ones being used in Prism. And having that variety means that you, buying the cards, if you're doing that and you're collecting the same player, so to speak, you're going to be able to see these differentiators. And that means it makes it a little bit more interesting. So when you're looking at these cards side by side, you're not just seeing the same images over and over again, the same handful of them. Again, in the new product, maybe that's changed up, and we'll get a chance to see that. But that's something that you notice that kind of hurts the earlier products. So finally, under the consistency piece, I want to talk about EPAC. And EPAC has created a bit of an interesting dynamic. And it's something that I've had a chance to talk about a couple different times on the channel, on the live stream, and some of the other videos that I've done. And one of the challenges that I think this creates is that even though nobody knows exactly what the combination is, nobody knows what the secret sauce is, how much stuff goes into the physical product and how much stuff goes into the EPAC product. The problem is you're gonna then, because we don't have that understanding of what the ratio is, what the breakdown is, it means we're left to our own devices to come up with our own conclusions. And the problem is you're gonna rely on anecdotal evidence. Well, what does the anecdotal evidence tell you? The anecdotal evidence tells you that in a lot of these products that we've noticed is that some of the higher end cards tend to be disproportionately appearing on EPAC. Now the problem is that's appearing. That's anecdotal evidence. You don't know if somebody just opened a box somewhere and pulled a bunch of high-end stuff and a bunch of great stuff, and you just don't see it because they don't break it on YouTube, they don't take a picture of it, they're not on Instagram, so you just don't know. But then you see these EPAC ones and you see these cards being pulled. But here's one thing that we can do that helps us a little bit, that gives us a little bit of an indicator, and that is eBay and other platforms. How often do we see certain cards? And that's the question we come into. And it's one of those things that I've been observing and keeping an eye out on. So I'm using the 2022 flagship when I'm looking at it. I'm trying to keep an eye on the ratio that I see certain autographs. And the thing is, the EPAC hasn't come out yet. So the question is going to be, when I'm monitoring these, and I'll give greater conclusions later when I get a chance to actually analyze that data, there are autographs that I see that just aren't appearing quite a bit. And you can kind of guess which one specifically I'm trying to identify and looking for. But at the same time, it's not that they don't appear. It's not that they're not out there. But the number is really low, all things considered. So unless it's super, uber short printed, which is possible, then the question is going to be when E-Pack shows up, do I then suddenly see a few more appear? A few more or way more? Well, the difference between those two is going to make up the difference whether they're still going to retain the high price that they tend to get when they actually show up on eBay versus if suddenly it floods the market, or at least relatively floods the market, does that mean the price comes down quite a bit? Which is very possible. It might be a case of, hey, all of a sudden a few more available. Hey, congratulations. Now you can get it at a cheaper price. I'd be okay with that. As a collector, I'm good with that. But it also means like it kind of discourages you though from opening the boxes because you're sitting there going like, okay, so I'm watching E-Pack. And again, this is anecdotal. It's just your observation. I'm watching E-Pack and it's like, oh man, they're pulling that great card, that great card, that great card. And then I'm watching box breaks of this and it's like, it's okay. Or maybe it's not so okay. And you're seeing that difference and you're like, okay, so does that mean I should be waiting for E-Pack? So does that mean the other stuff doesn't get broken? And maybe that's not why we're not seeing some of those nicer cards because they're still sitting in boxes unopened. That's why I say it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's kind of the inconsistency of it and just the lack of understanding and transparency on it, I think creates a little bit of a problem. Because Panini in their distribution method actually releases the cards, you're getting the physical boxes, so you're able to see enough of these cards hit the market, and then you can kind of figure out where we stand on it. And that's kind of where we find ourselves with the differentiator between the two. But those are some of the big differences, some of the big categories. Release consistency, creating that gap from that image I showed you earlier. I'll put it on the screen one more time so you can see the difference between the left and the right. We'll see what 2023 looks like. I can probably build one of these again once we get a chance and we get a little further down the road and find out what's next. The checklist. And the checklist is going to be one thing that WWE is going to have a major edge on regardless. Just because they've got all those folks under Legends contracts and they have the ability to bring out all these cards for old school fans, for current school fans, and for potentially new school fans that are interested in the developmental talent. Those are going to be available, and those checklists are going to be bigger because of that. So that's one thing that's going to be well in WWE's favor, just because they've been around longer. But as I suggested, there are some ways that AEW could mitigate with that if they want to incorporate some of the ROH stuff. So that's one way that they might be able to cheat around that a little bit, and maybe include some of the New Japan folks if they're able to strike the right kind of deal. Maybe that might be something they could do to expand the checklist out a little bit and give it a little bit more variety. But one thing they can also do for sure is take advantage of the checklist they do have, the people they do have available, and try to expand the amount of images. Again, this might be the case with the new product. We'll see if that comes to pass, but that's something that is a major differentiator. It's something that has hurt it in the past. And the last one is the product consistency, which, as I talked about, a little bit less than the templates would be really good, but at the same time, some kind of transparency or comfort level with the E-Pack side of things. Because right now, when we look at the E-Pack, it's hard to feel like you're not being punished for actually buying the physical boxes. When you open the physical boxes and you find that it's just really hard to pull certain cards, but then at the same time they show up in abundance. The question is, so is it that so many more people are opening E-Pack? Or is it that the distribution isn't quite even? Or is it really skewed in one direction? And the problem is we don't know. So it leaves us kind of to our own devices to let our imagination run wild and try to figure out, with conspiracy theory or tinfoil hat or whatever you want, where we think things are falling. And that's kind of where it gets really tricky. So those are things that I think really do differentiate the two of them. The fact is, regardless of whether you think one product is better or the other product is better, the two licenses could not have been handled any more differently. And we'll see if that starts to change going forward and if that gap starts to narrow a little bit, but it's going to take a lot in order to really narrow it down because I think Panini's got it down to a little bit of a science as far as which products they want to release and the order in which they release them. And that consistency honestly helps them because just knowing that there is going to be a set of products coming out, whatever they are, even if it's going to be the same products, just knowing they're going to come out in a certain cadence allows people to plan for it in a certain way. It allows the hype to stay because you have a product out just long enough for people to get interested, get the cards, get the singles, chase after the stuff they want to do, and then the next product comes out and gives them a new cycle. Well, when something happens, a product comes out, and then there's a really long gap, that's where you start to lose a little bit of the momentum, and that creates a bit of a differentiator between the two. So hopefully you enjoyed this comparison. As new products come out, I'll probably take some time to start breaking them down. I will talk about the WWE products as well because it is an interesting market to kind of see and develop. And there's some other things I'm keeping an eye out on that I do want to talk about a little bit more on this little corner, this little segment of the stuff I do on the channel. Anyway, so that's it for me this time around. More videos coming up on the channel, including live streams on Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, where we talk about whatever's going on in terms of hobby-wise, and we do touch on some of these topics there as well. With that said, like if you like, subscribe to the channel. Thanks very much, and we'll catch you in the next one.